Just 5 years ago, Western automakers dismissed Chinese car companies as cheap copycats. Today, they're in full panic mode. In the epicenter of their crisis, Germany, the birthplace of the automobile itself. What happened is a story of underestimation, outdated strategies, and a technological revolution that moved faster than any board meeting could comprehend. For over a century, Germany owned the automotive world. Volkswagen, BMW, Mercedes-Benz, and Audi weren't just car companies, they were symbols of German engineering excellence. When you thought of quality, performance, and innovation in automobiles, you thought of Germany. These companies didn't just manufacture cars, they defined what excellence looked like. Their influence was so profound that entire economies were built around their success. The pride was justified. The dominance was real. But in 2026, something unprecedented happened that would shake the very foundations of this empire. A Chinese company called BYD executed a market invasion so precise, so calculated, and so effective that it has left Germany's automotive titans scrambling for survival. This isn't about a single company losing market share. This is about an entire industry that controlled global automotive standards, discovering that the rules of the game have changed overnight, and they weren't prepared to play by new rules. Let me walk you through the numbers first, because the numbers tell the story better than any dramatic narrative ever could. In the first half of 2026, BYD registered 26,264 vehicles in Germany. To understand what that means, you need to know that this represents a 318% increase from the same period in 2025, a 318% increase. But the real shock came in May 2026. In a single month, BYD registered 6,169 vehicles in Germany, capturing 2.6% of the entire new car market. This wasn't a niche product aimed at a specific demographic. This was mainstream market penetration happening at a speed that traditional automakers couldn't match. But here's where it gets truly alarming for the Germans. 1 out of every 7 plug-in hybrid vehicles registered in Germany in May came from BYD. Not 1 out of 100, 1 out of 7. The company's flagship model, the Atto 2 DMI plug-in hybrid, became the single best-selling plug-in hybrid model in Germany for that month with 2,113 registrations. BYD announced it was the leading brand in the entire plug-in hybrid segment with a market share exceeding 15%. When you look at these numbers, you realize you're not watching incremental market shifts. You're watching a market transformation. Let's look at what this means for the German giants. In May 2026, Volkswagen suffered an 8.9% decline in sales, dropping to a 19% market share. Mercedes-Benz experienced the same 8.9% decline and fell to 8.3% market share. BMW declined by 3.4%. This might sound like small numbers in isolation, but in the context of an industry operating at razor-thin margins, these declines represent catastrophic losses in absolute profit terms. Volkswagen, which had held the number 1 position in the German market since nearly the beginning of the automotive age, was losing its grip at a pace that even pessimistic analysts didn't predict. The half-year data for 2026 is even more damaging to the German narrative. While BYD and other Chinese manufacturers surged, Volkswagen remained in first place with traditional market dominance, but barely. Skoda, a Volkswagen subsidiary, actually jumped to second place, surpassing both BMW and Mercedes for the first time in the traditional ranking. Mercedes, which had held second place for decades, slipped to fourth position. BMW held third, but only barely. This wasn't just about losing a few percentage points of market share. This was about the complete reorganization of market hierarchies that had stood unchanged for generations. The most stunning revelation came from the first half 2026 data showing that BYD had cracked the top 20 car brands in Germany for the first time in company history. They outsold every Japanese brand except Toyota. This is remarkable when you consider that Japanese brands have been staples of the German market for decades. Toyota, Honda, and Mazda had built reputations that took decades to establish. BYD achieved this in 5 years. When you really examine this achievement, you understand that you're not looking at a company that's becoming successful. You're looking at a company that has already become successful and is now accelerating into dominance. But the real story isn't just about one market. The stress on Germany's automotive industry is coming from multiple directions simultaneously, and BYD is leading the charge on the most critical front. Let's look at what happened in China, where German automakers had built enormous manufacturing capacity and sales expectations. Volkswagen's China sales dropped 37% in the second quarter of 2026. BMW's China sales fell 30%. Mercedes and Porsche reported similarly devastating declines. These weren't slight contractions. These were collapses of business that these companies had built over decades. The cause of this China collapse is directly connected to the BYD phenomenon we're seeing in Germany. In China, BYD and other domestic electric vehicle makers have captured nearly 69% of the market. The German brands, which had once dominated at 57% market share in 2020, have been crushed down to just 32% by 2025. This means that in the world's largest automobile market, Germany's share has been cut by more than half in just 5 years. Volkswagen has lost its top position to BYD. The company that once defined automotive excellence in China is now playing for third or fourth place. When you combine the German market pressure with the China market catastrophe, you start to understand why these companies have begun announcing restructuring plans that would have been unthinkable just 2 years ago. Volkswagen announced plans to close 4 German factories and potentially lay off up to 100,000 employees by 2030. This would represent one of the largest workforce reductions in automotive industry history. The company that had defined manufacturing excellence and worker stability is now facing the prospect of dismantling its German operations at a scale that exceeds even the aftermath of the 2009 financial crisis. BMW has entered austerity mode that the company hasn't experienced in decades. They're implementing cost-cutting measures so severe that they may result in approximately 7,700 job cuts, with restructuring costs estimated at roughly 1 billion euros. Mercedes-Benz has launched similarly aggressive efficiency programs. These aren't strategic adjustments or tactical repositioning. These are desperate attempts to right-size organizations that were built on the assumption of continued market dominance. Now, let's examine why this happened and how BYD orchestrated this transformation so effectively. The answer lies in understanding that BYD didn't just make cheaper cars. BYD made fundamentally better cars in the categories that matter most in 2026. Chinese rivals, particularly BYD, have leapfrogged the Germans on electric vehicles with cheaper cars, longer range, and faster charging capabilities. While German automakers spent the last decade transitioning their legacy operations to electric, BYD was born digital. The company has no legacy factories to maintain, no massive pension obligations to honor, and no need to protect the residual value of internal combustion engine technology. BYD's strategy in Germany was brilliantly executed. The company set a 2026 target of over 50,000 annual vehicle sales, aiming to surpass MG as the leading Chinese automotive brand in Europe. To achieve this ambitious goal, BYD announced plans to expand its dealer network to more than 350 locations by the end of 2026. In just a few weeks alone, in early 2026, 40 new outlets were added. The company moved from approximately 190 sales outlets to targeting 350 by year end. This expansion was strategic and targeted at rural areas traditionally served by mainstream German brands, attempting to reach customer segments that had historically been loyal to Volkswagen and other domestic manufacturers. The product strategy was equally calculated. BYD focused heavily on the Atto 2 plug-in hybrid as a flagship model. The company recognized something that traditional automakers were slow to accept. German customers weren't ready to fully commit to battery electric vehicles, but they were absolutely ready for plug-in hybrids that gave them the best of both worlds. In January 2026, plug-in hybrids represented 46% of all BYD new registrations in Germany, with battery electric vehicles accounting for the remaining 59.4%. But the trend was clear. The plug-in hybrid segment was becoming increasingly important to customer preferences. BYD implemented aggressive discounting strategies that further accelerated adoption. Industry observers noted that these deep discounts could compress margins, affect brand perception, and pressure used car prices. But this is precisely the point. BYD was willing to accept lower margins now in exchange for market dominance later. The company was playing a game that German automakers don't typically play. German companies traditionally aim for premium positioning and high margins. BYD was willing to sacrifice margin for market share and customer base size. Once you own the market, margins become less critical because volume compensates. The company's financial structure supports this aggressive strategy. According to BYD's 2025 annual report, the company's revenue reached 803.97 billion yuan, approximately $113 billion, up 3.46% from 2024. While the company's net profit fell 1,897% to 32.62 billion yuan, or about $4.7 billion, the margin compression came primarily from domestic price wars in China. Internationally, the situation was completely different. BYD's overseas car business earned a 28.1% gross margin, far above the 17.2% it made in China. This means that the company's international expansion, particularly in Europe, is significantly more profitable than its domestic business. This profitability gap reveals BYD's strategic calculus. The company can afford to be aggressive internationally because it's making superior margins on overseas sales compared to its home market. The situation is inverted for German automakers. They make thin margins on their volume business in Europe and depend on premium pricing and higher margin sales in China. As China sales have collapsed, they've lost the financial cushion that allowed them to invest in new technologies without devastating their earnings. The manufacturing expansion plans reveal that BYD is not just attacking German market share temporarily. The company is establishing permanent European operations. BYD is building its first European car plant in the Hungarian city of Szeged. The facility has an annual capacity of 300,000 vehicles. Production is expected to begin by the end of 2026, with series production of the Dolphin Surf hatchback as the first model. The Dolphin Surf will be priced at approximately $24,500, positioning it directly against mid-range German compact vehicles. This Hungarian plant is a masterstroke of strategic planning. By manufacturing in Europe, BYD avoids the 17% tariff that the European Union imposed on Chinese cars in 2025. This tariff was supposed to protect European manufacturers from Chinese competition, but instead it triggered BYD to establish European manufacturing capacity. In essence, European trade protection policy accelerated Chinese integration into Europe, exactly the opposite of its intended effect. BYD has also announced plans for a second manufacturing plant in Turkey, further cementing its position as a European automotive manufacturer rather than a Chinese exporter. The capacity of these European plants is staggering when you consider the timeline. By 2027, BYD will have 300,000 vehicles of annual capacity in Hungary alone, plus additional capacity in Turkey. Volkswagen's entire German manufacturing capacity is approximately 1.2 million vehicles annually, but this is spread across all models, all markets, and all powertrains. When BYD's European capacity is fully operational, the company will be producing vehicles in Europe at a scale that approaches 15 to 20% of Volkswagen's total German capacity, and BYD's focus will be exclusively on high-margin electric and plug-in hybrid vehicles. The technological story reveals an even more disturbing reality for traditional automakers. At the 2026 Beijing Auto Show, German automakers Volkswagen, Mercedes-Benz, and BMW prominently featured electric vehicle architectures and autonomous driving technologies sourced from Chinese companies. This represents a complete technological reversal from the traditional model. For decades, the joint venture model worked as follows. Foreign automakers would establish partnerships with Chinese companies, providing technology in exchange for market access. Western companies had the technology edge. Chinese companies had the market. The arrangement seemed stable and permanent. Today, that model has completely inverted. German companies are now sourcing electric vehicle platforms and autonomous driving technology from Chinese suppliers. The traditional technology leaders are now technology followers. They're playing catch-up in the very categories that will define automotive success in the next decade. Volkswagen is targeting mass production of solid-state batteries from 2028, which would be aggressive by any standard. BMW and Mercedes are targeting similar timelines around 2030. But BYD is already producing batteries at scale today. The company doesn't need to catch up because it never fell behind. While German companies were managing the transition from internal combustion to electric, BYD was born in the electric era. The profitability picture for German automakers has become genuinely alarming. Combined operating profit at Volkswagen, BMW, and Mercedes-Benz dropped approximately 76% to roughly 1.7 billion euros in the third quarter of 2025. Let me emphasize this point. A 76% collapse in combined profit. This was the lowest profit level for these three companies since the depths of the 2009 financial crisis. In 2009, the world economy was literally falling apart. Governments were intervening in automotive companies to prevent complete collapse. Today, in 2026, with no global financial crisis occurring, German automakers' profits have fallen to 2009 levels. German carmakers' revenue fell 4% in the first quarter of 2026, while the top global automakers' revenue rose 2% on average. This means that global automotive industry was growing at this same time period, but German companies were contracting. The competitors weren't all struggling. The German companies, specifically, were losing ground while the industry expanded. This is the distinction between cyclical decline and structural decline. Cyclical decline happens when an entire industry suffers. Structural decline happens when an industry grows, but your company shrinks. Germany was experiencing structural decline. When you examine the leadership statements from these companies, the panic becomes palpable. Volkswagen CEO Oliver Blume has framed the overhaul as essential for survival. He's described the current cost structures as unsustainable. He's highlighted discussions with Chinese partners about potential production arrangements in Europe under Volkswagen standards. This is the language of a company that understands its existence is threatened. A decade ago, Volkswagen would have dismissed such suggestions. Today, the company is exploring them because the alternative is irrelevance. Analysts have noted that while cost-cutting is necessary, the deeper issue remains weak sales and the need for more competitive products. This is the crucial insight. The German automakers can cut costs, but they cannot restore their former competitive position through cost-cutting alone. They need to rebuild competitiveness in product, design, in battery technology, in software architecture, and in supply chain efficiency. These capabilities don't emerge from restructuring. They emerge from fundamental reimagining of how automobiles are designed and manufactured. BYD's sales strategy in Germany also reveals sophisticated market understanding. In 2025, BYD registered roughly 23,000 vehicles in Germany compared to approximately 26,000 units for MG, another Chinese automotive brand. However, the composition of these sales was revealing. Private buyers accounted for only 12.4% of BYD's German sales in 2025, with the remainder driven by corporate leasing, rental companies, and self-registrations. This means that BYD's 2026 strategy wasn't just about selling more cars to private consumers. It was about flooding the market with vehicles through corporate channels, building brand familiarity, and establishing the product in the used car market through rental fleets and lease returns. This strategy is brilliant because it creates a virtuous cycle. When rental companies and corporate fleets adopt BYD vehicles at scale, thousands of customers experience BYD products without needing to make a primary purchase decision. They rent a vehicle, drive it for a week, experience the performance, and form opinions. When that rental period ends and they need to buy a new car, BYD transitions from being an unknown Chinese brand to being a familiar brand with direct usage experience. The rental strategy converts customer uncertainty into customer familiarity, which is the hardest part of market entry for any new competitor. BYD's target for 2026 was to achieve a 5% market share in the plug-in hybrid segment in Germany and 4% market share in pure battery electric vehicles. Across all drive types, the company was targeting 1.5 to 2% of the total German market. For comparison, Tesla, which had been in Germany for years and had built significant brand equity, held only 0.7% of the German market in 2025. BYD was targeting market share multiples of Tesla's current penetration. And based on 2026 data showing BYD at 2.6% market share in May alone, the company was on track to exceed these ambitious targets. The executive leading this German expansion is Piotr Bielkowski, BYD's head of brand operations in Germany. He joined BYD from Stellantis, bringing deep automotive industry experience to the Chinese company. When discussing BYD's strategy, Bielkowski has emphasized the growing importance of plug-in hybrids for BYD in Germany and Europe. The company initially launched in Europe with battery electric vehicles only, but customer. Feedback and market data revealed that German customers, while interested in electrification, were hesitant to fully commit to battery-only technology. The plug-in hybrid segment addressed this hesitation by providing two fuel sources, gasoline backup, and the psychological security of not being stranded without a charging infrastructure. BYD's Seal U DMI was the most successful plug-in hybrid in Europe in 2025, according to market data. The Seal 6 DMI, BYD's first estate model in Europe and also a plug-in hybrid, is increasingly visible on German roads. These products directly target the sweet spot of German customer preferences, practical vehicle design with electrified powertrains that eliminate range anxiety. This is precisely the segment where traditionals, German automakers, are weakest. Volkswagen offers plug-in hybrids, but they're priced for the premium market. Audi offers them, but with similar premium positioning. BYD is offering comparable or superior products at prices that undercut German manufacturers by 30 to 40%. The automotive industry has never seen a competitive disruption of this magnitude happen this quickly. In the 1980s, Japanese automakers disrupted American manufacturers, but that process took 15 years to play out completely. Korean automakers' rise took even longer to achieve significant market penetration. Chinese automakers are compressing this timeline dramatically. BYD has moved from near zero presence in the German market in 2022 to entering the top 20 car brands in 2026. This is 4 years. In 4 years, the company has achieved market penetration that typically takes a decade or more. The geopolitical and economic implications are staggering. Germany's economy has been anchored by automotive manufacturing for a century. The country's prosperity, employment levels, and technological reputation have all been built on automotive excellence. If German automakers lose their global competitive position, the consequences cascade through the entire economy. It's not just about one industry, it's about the foundation of German economic power being systematically undermined. Germany has already begun shedding automotive jobs at an accelerating pace. The industry shed 51,500 jobs in a single year recently. If Volkswagen proceeds with its announced restructuring plans of closing 4 factories and laying off 100,000 employees by 2030, the economic devastation will reverberate through German society for decades. These aren't just job numbers. These represent communities dependent on manufacturing employment, suppliers who've built their entire businesses around serving automotive manufacturers, and skilled workers who have no comparable job opportunities elsewhere. The German government has responded with the only tools available to it: tariffs and trade barriers. The 17% tariff on Chinese electric vehicles was intended to protect German manufacturers. Instead, it accelerated BYD's decision to establish European manufacturing, which actually increases competitive pressure on German automakers because BYD no longer pays the tariff penalty. Trade barriers often backfire because they trigger the exact behavior policymakers are trying to prevent. Competitors respond to barriers by integrating into the protected market. The intellectual property and technology transfer implications are equally significant. As German automakers source electric vehicle architectures and autonomous driving technologies from Chinese companies, they're creating new intellectual property dependencies. Unlike the joint venture era, where foreign companies maintained control of core technology, today's reverse partnerships place Western automakers in the position of customers rather than technology leaders. Once you become dependent on another company's technology, you surrender strategic autonomy. BYD's chairman Wang Chuanfu declared during the company's annual shareholder meeting that the worst is over for BYD, and the company aims to become the world's largest carmaker by volume within 5 years. Overseas growth has put BYD on track to exceed its 2026 target of selling 1.5 million vehicles outside China. To contextualize this, BYD selling 1.5 million vehicles annually outside China represents roughly the total annual vehicle production of Porsche, Lamborghini, and Bentley combined, multiple times over. The company is targeting a scale that would make it one of the top 5 automotive manufacturers globally. The traditional playbook for dealing with this kind of disruption doesn't exist for German automakers because nothing of this magnitude has occurred in automotive history. Toyota and Honda rose gradually and built premium positioning over decades. Samsung Electronics moved into smartphones and tablets gradually and with time for competitors to respond. BYD is executing a disruption strategy that combines speed, scale, technology superiority, and aggressive pricing in a way that hasn't been seen before. Some analysts suggest that German automakers' strengths in premium brand equity, particularly Mercedes and Porsche, sophisticated engineering expertise, and substantial research and development spending could allow them to compete in premium segments even if they lose the mass market. They point to Volkswagen's collaboration with Rivian on software and potential China joint venture arrangements as evidence that German companies can adapt. But this narrative misses the critical point. You cannot restore industry leadership from a position of market minority. Once you've lost the mass market, you've lost the volume that generates the profits needed to fund premium brand development. The worst-case scenario is gradual decline, where premium segments provide enough profitability to keep companies alive, but not enough to restore leadership. Germany would transition from being the world's automotive technology leader to being a premium niche player, similar to how Switzerland produces luxury watches, but no longer dominates overall watch manufacturing. The country that defined automotive excellence would accept a supporting role. The best-case scenario requires German automakers to successfully compete with BYD in mass-market electric vehicles while maintaining premium positioning. This dual strategy requires manufacturing cost structures matching BYD's efficiency, software development speed matching Chinese companies' agility, and supply chain integration delivering comparable costs. These aren't marginal improvements, but fundamental transformations. As we stand in mid-2026 looking at this situation, the transformation is still unfolding. BYD has established dominant position in plug-in hybrids and strong position in battery electric vehicles. The company's European manufacturing capacity is coming online. The dealer network continues expanding. The product portfolio is growing with new models, specifically designed for European preferences. BYD's next phase will likely involve moving upmarket, establishing a premium brand to compete directly with Mercedes and BMW in the luxury segment. The lesson from this disruption will reverberate through business education and strategy discussions for decades. Companies don't lose dominance because of incompetence. German automakers aren't stupid or poorly managed. They lose dominance because they optimized their organizations for the previous era. They built massive, profitable businesses in the internal combustion era and created organizational structures, manufacturing facilities, and business models aligned with that reality. When the era changed, they discovered that the organizations that are most optimized for one era often struggle most in the transition to the next era. BYD entered the automotive market after the combustion era was ending. The company had no legacy to protect, no factories to repurpose, no employees to reassign. BYD could optimize purely for the electric era. This organizational flexibility, combined with superior battery technology from its energy business, aggressive pricing, and sophisticated market strategy, created an unbeatable combination. German automakers could theoretically match BYD's technology. They couldn't theoretically match BYD's cost structures without tearing apart the organizations that made them successful. This is the real story of how BYD destroyed Germany's biggest car makers. It's not that BYD invented a better mousetrap. It's that BYD was free to build a mousetrap optimized for the new world, while German companies were constrained by the need to protect the value of their existing mousetraps. In the end, the better technology and strategy won. But the victory was less about BYD's excellence and more about German automakers' constraints. Understanding this distinction is crucial for any company facing disruption in any industry. What we're witnessing in 2026 is a transformation that will define automotive manufacturing for decades ahead. The competitive landscape has fundamentally shifted and will never return to its previous configuration. German automakers will survive, but as regional players rather than global industry leaders. The automotive industry's center of gravity has moved permanently eastward to China, the epicenter of automotive innovation and market leadership. BYD has orchestrated this seismic shift successfully.